Hey guys and dolls, welcome back to the Toyland, and it is time for another episode of Cover to Cover with M. I opted for another Superman book this time. A more, I guess some people might say, legitimate Superman book, as opposed to the Smallville interpretation. But it's a lot different from the other books I've looked at in that it's not exactly just a collected volume, but it's an omnibus. It's the entire storyline of the death of Superman. It's the entire year run where he dies, and then the four new quote-unquote Supermen step in, and also his return. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically the story encompassed in this entire book. You guys can pause and read that if you would like. But yeah, it begins with the infamous and well-known death of Superman as interpreted in BVS and also in the animated version, which is mentioned here, and it's also very, very, very different from the book, the animated version. In fact, I would say BVS's interpretation was more accurate than the animated version in many ways. So, but yeah, so the first 7 or 9 or whatever it is issues are that storyline: Superman and Doomsday coming around and heading to Metropolis and taking down everything in his path on the way, and ultimately it culminates in this, the first part here. And then, of course, following his death, we are introduced to 4 new Supermen, quote unquote, who are Superboy, the Eradicator, Cyborg Superman, and Steel, aka John Henry Irons, right? I believe, yes. Yeah. And from there, those guys show up. They kind of take up the mantle until he returns. Which, one thing I can say about this book, or this whole storyline, is that deaths and returns are all too common in comic books, right? I'm sure most of you can agree. Like, it's a staple. People die and they come back. But it's usually very quick, or maybe they die at the end of an issue and the next issue comes and it's like, oh, well, that was a clone, or so on and so forth, simple one note lines that completely just like, okay, take away the shock of what you initially seen. But this storyline was very credible in the fact that it killed Superman and it kept him dead. There was an entire year of no Superman, and people genuinely missed him. They were like, when is Superman coming back? So when he finally makes his return, it's, now, like, reading this omnibus as a whole, it won't be as impactful, but at the time, after an entire year of not seeing the real Superman, it was pretty impactful when he finally came back. So the beginning was a gigantic splash, they killed the Man of Steel. And of course, like I said, people thought, well, okay, he'll be back in issue or 2 or 3. But no, it was many issues before he finally returned, and yeah, people ate it up. They were thankful. So, but you got to give him kudos for that. Very cool. Yeah, there's not much more to say. A lot of people, a lot of you guys know about this storyline. I mean, the actual death issue where he dies is, as far as I know, still the number 1 best-selling comic of all time. It sold millions of copies and sold out across the nation. Stores sold out. They could not meet demands. People that had never even read a comic book in their life went and bought this issue of Superman. It was huge. So, yeah. Like I said, as far as I know, still literally the number one best-selling issue of any comic book of all time was the death of Superman. It was a big deal when they took this guy away. And it was funny because at the time, it was the early 90s. Characters like Deadpool were showing up and really changing the medium. That whole anti-hero thing, they were bringing this whole, like, badass, like, I can be, kind of an asshole and more adult-oriented and still be successful, and it worked, and it kind of made Superman irrelevant, I think that's when the term the big blue Boy Scout really took off, because in comparison to a lot of popular, Spawn was big at that time, there was so many anti-hero type comic books that were very contrasting to Superman, and a lot of people, it was something new in a way, it was fresh, and people really flocked to that, so Superman kind of became irrelevant at that time. But then when they took him away in such a big way, it really, it sunk in. People ended up missing the guy. They were like, when is he coming back? Is he coming back? A year is a long time when reading comic books, especially when you get, an issue a month? Or even when you get more issues, because this spans several titles, like Superman, Superman the Man of Steel, The Adventures of Superman, I believe. There was several titles. So, if you're getting each of those titles every month, 3-4 titles, and you're not getting the flagship character event, at first it's fresh and cool, but eventually you kind of get homesick in a way. You want Superman back. So I think they really hit it out of the park with this. They succeeded in doing something huge. I mentioned in one of my videos, it was a mail video, where I got the wedding album, and they were actually going to do the wedding before they did the death, but they wanted the wedding to coincide with Lois and Clark, the TV show, and that wedding that they had on there. So they killed him, and it ended up being bigger than anything they ever could have imagined. I actually met Dan Jurgens, the guy that wrote and drew this whole entire series. I have a couple things signed by him. It was a thing off my bucket list. It was like a dream. I live in bumfudge nowhere in Minnesota, and I've never been to a Comic-Con or anything like that. And I went to a free comic book day down in the cities here, and Dan Jurgens was there, and I met him, and it was so cool, like, to be able to meet the guy that did such a huge, impactful story on the comic book world. Like, it was crazy. Definitely cool. So, alright, I'm done here. I've gushed enough over this. I love this story. It's one of my favorites. So, Doomsday is one of my favorite villains. A villain that can go just straight up toe-to-toe with the Man of Steel in physicality, and ultimately, in a sense, come out on top. Like, it's crazy. There's not a lot of depth to Doomsday, which for me is his appeal. He's not a multi-level villain like Lex Luthor or Brainiac. There's not a lot of complexity to him. He's just a monster. He wants to destroy. He hates Kryptonians. But he has most of the power. He is Kryptonian, so he has that level of strength. So that always just appealed to me. I'm a huge Superman fan, but it always fascinated me more someone that could go toe-to-toe with and kill the Man of Steel in a physical fight. That it just drew me right in. So, love Superman, love Doomsday. But, alright, I'm done here. Thanks as always, you guys, for tuning in. I appreciate it. And until next time.